Hi, everyone, and welcome to our feature, The Art of English. We're so happy that you can join us today. I'm Linda, and this is Peter.
Hello, Linda. Hello, everyone. Good to be here for another month of The Art of English.
And we want to thank you so much for listening and viewing our last video on Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and so we're really happy about that. And please let us know if you have some suggestions, if there are other books that you would like to hear about, or other authors, other pieces of classic literature. So today we are talking about Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. That great, big 19th century American novel published almost right in the middle of the century, 1851, by the author Herman Melville. It is sometimes, in America, they talk about what is the great American novel of some kind, the great work of fiction in American literature. And Moby Dick is not always, but sometimes mentioned as that great American novel. So this is a book with wonderful English in it, but also really captures a sense of America. I think also a sense of something in men, particularly, and something in literature, in the expressive power of words. So we're very excited to be bringing this excerpt to you today.
Yes. It is definitely descriptive, and our excerpt comes from the very beginning of the novel. It is the opening phrase or the opening paragraph, and we are introduced to our narrator. And why don't we read that excerpt now?
Go ahead and read it, yeah, so you can hear some of this great English writing. This is Page 1, the very first chapter of the novel. It's like about 600 pages long. It's wonderful, but it's not just something you're going to knock off in a weekend. So set aside some time for it if you want to read it. Here we go. Page 1, Chapter 1. Moby Dick. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos gets and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men, in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me.
Well, thank you for that reading, Peter. And it's one of the most famous openings in literature. People know this very well. And just to give you some background on the author, Herman Melville, he came from a very well-to-do merchant family, and he actually went on a ship, and he was a sailor for a while. So he has experience, and he writes from his experience from being on sea and as a sailor.
Right, particularly a sailor on a ship hunting whales. Whaling was a very popular industry in the 19th century in America, and the Moby Dick book is about the hunt for a particular whale, and so Melville was certainly drawing on personal experience. He wasn't just completely making this up out of his head.
All right. So let's look at the first question that we have to start us off. The first line of the novel is only 3 words. How do they draw us into the story? So the first line is, "Call me Ishmael."
Call me Ishmael. What a way to begin a novel, to begin a story. Most of the time, you would just say, it was a dark and stormy night.
Yeah, usually you set the scene.
Right, right. Instead of introducing the narrator. And when we say introducing, we have to put quotes around that, air quotes around introducing, because he doesn't say actually that he is Ishmael. He says, call me.
Right.
Ishmael.
So it could be a pseudonym. It could be a fake name. It's not his real name, but
and
that's
so
what he goes by.
Right off the bat, we're wondering, well, what is your real name? And why won't you tell us? So right from the very beginning, we're a little intrigued as to who this guy is who is supposedly going to tell us this big, long adventure story, and he won't even tell us who he really is, what his real name is. And Linda, it's also very interesting, the fake name, the pseudonym that he chooses. Ishmael, what's the resonance with Ishmael?
Yeah, so Ishmael is a biblical name. He was the son of Abraham and Hagar. And if you know the Bible, you know Abraham, who the father in Jewish and also in Christian religion.
Going back almost to the beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, Abraham is one of the patriarchs, the fathers of the Jews eventually and what are now modern-day Christians.
Right. And so Hagar was actually a servant of his, and she wasn't his official wife, but he couldn't have children with his wife. So he ended up having a child with his servant, and that child was Ishmael. He eventually did have a child with his wife, who was Isaac, but Ishmael was the illegitimate child.
Right, because in the Old Testament, God promised Abraham and his real wife Sarah a child. And basically, they got tired of waiting. And so Sarah, his wife, suggested, well, why don't you sleep with our servant woman Hagar, and that will be the way that we bring God's promised child into the world. It was a terrible mistake, of course, but that's what they did. And the son then that Abraham sired through the servant Hagar was Ishmael. And so, like Linda said, when Sarah, his real wife, gave birth to Isaac, who is the next of the patriarchs, what about Hagar and Ishmael? They were driven out.
Yeah, they were sent away.
Yeah.
And so that also started another religion. So Ishmael,
yes.
He's the creator or the father of
the Arab peoples.
Islam,
Yeah, and of Islam. And so Ishmael, for the narrator in our book here, to say, I'm not going to tell you what my name is, but you can call me Ishmael. He's not just choosing that name at random. Ishmael, because of the biblical Ishmael, because of that character in Western culture, Ishmael has a connotation of being an outcast, a wanderer, someone rejected, not somebody important, not somebody famous. And so for a book, for a work of fiction, we often expect, especially in the 19th century, to hear a story told by someone special, someone important, a king or a warrior or an adventurer of some kind. But this guy is basically saying, I'm nobody. Right at the beginning of the book, I'm nobody, but let me tell you something that happened to me. Let me tell you about the hunt for this great whale.
And there's also another, someone else in the book who has a biblical name. That's his captain, Ahab, Captain Ahab. And I don't think we'll have time to get into him, but
right.
Ahab,
He's
the name
one
was...
in the picture here.
Yes.
On the page in your magazine, the guy holding the harpoon and pointing to the big whale fin in the water there, that's Captain Ahab. You can always tell it's Ahab because one of his legs is wooden. How did he come up with a wooden leg? Well, Ahab was once hunting a whale, and rather than capture and kill the whale bit his leg off.
Yes, and ever since then, he's had this vendetta against the whale and wants to capture the whale. And that is how Ishmael ends up on this journey.
Right. Ishmael doesn't realize that at first. Like we read in the passage, Ishmael was just feeling blue, feeling down in the dumps, feeling depressed, and what he does to get out of that feeling is take to sea, go on a boat somewhere. Again, this is the 19th century, so you can just casually sort of get on a boat like that, join a whaling crew of some sort. But he realizes, about a third of the way into the book that he's joined the crew of this Captain Ahab, who has this vendetta.
Yes, who's hunting this giant whale.
Hunting this giant whale
Moby
for
Dick.
vengeance.
Yeah.
That's what vendetta means, an unresolved matter between two enemies, a vendetta, seeking vengeance, seeking revenge for the leg that the whale bit off of him.
And another way that these three words draw us in is that it feels like a personal conversation. Like Ishmael is having a one-on-one conversation with us and just call me Ishmael. And then he wants to get into this story and tell you about how we ended up on this adventure.
Right, and there's some wonderful expressions. Like we say, the passage that we read is basically, if you wanted to boil it down and sort of get rid of all that language, you could just say, you can call me Ishmael. I was feeling kind of depressed lately, so I got on this whaling ship to cheer myself up. That's basically what it is. But you have this wonderful phrase in which he describes his depression, and we should note that is one of the joys of reading Moby Dick. Partly it's the story, the plot, what happens. Do they get the whale? Do they not? What's it like being at sea and hunting whales and all that? But another part of the joy of the book is the detail.
Yes.
Because Herman Melville is a terrific writer and an observer of people and of things and of human life, and a lot of the book's length comes from these digressions that he will make, these sort of off-roads from the main plot to tell us about the whaling industry or to tell us about whales, specifically in 19th century America. And that could sound like, just sort of a textbook almost rather than an exciting story. But no, because Melville is such a good writer, it adds to the plot. It adds to the suspense and the excitement and draws you in throughout the book, just like he does right here in that first sentence.
Exactly. He uses very descriptive language, very expressive, and we can see this in our excerpt. Like instead of Ishmael just saying, well, I was depressed, so I joined this adventure on this boat or went on this whaling journey, he describes exactly how he's feeling. So you can feel how he's feeling, the depression that he's feeling, the melancholy, the despair. He conveys that all through the language. And so let's look at some of those phrases. So we can see that he didn't have any money, so he was broke. And he was also bored. He didn't have nothing particular to interest him on shore. And so he thought about going to sea.
Right. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen. Spleen, most of you may know that word as an organ that we have, I think, right about here. I'm not completely sure what it does, something about regulating bile or something. But in the 19th century, and sometimes even today, you'll hear spleen used to describe a sort of angry, irritated state of mind or mood that you're in, a spleen. And this is, so he's saying, a way to drive off, to get rid of, to get out of that spleen sense of mind. He thought he would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. What a way to describe the ocean, the watery part of the world, And then there's that, shortly after it, there's that expression, whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, which is...
That's a great expression.
4 or 5 words to say...
He was sad. Yeah, he's frowning.
About the mouth. Yeah. When I find myself walking around like this all the time, Here's my favorite. Whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul.
This is a fall day that it's raining, it's dark.
It's kind of chilly. It's not Christmas yet.
It's really depressing. Yeah, so he describes this depression, but in such a vivid way as a November day, and it's raining and it's damp, and
then that brings us actually to our second discussion question here, the next one. Whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing, involuntarily means without deciding to, you just find yourself doing it involuntarily, pausing to stop or rest for a moment, involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses.
Yeah, and coupled with the following sentence in which he's bringing up the rear of funerals, we get the sense that he's contemplating his own death. If he's involuntarying, it just happens naturally that he's pausing before the places that sell coffins, what are coffins for, to bury people in. He has death on his mind, and he finds himself in funerals. Maybe he wasn't even supposed to attend the funeral, but he's there. He's drawn to these very morbid circumstances.
Right. And involuntarily, it's not like he wakes up in the morning. What'll I do today? Well, I think I'll pause behind a coffin warehouse and maybe go to a funeral. No, he just finds himself doing this. That's when he knows that he's in a bad state of mind. And then that word hypos, that is, an archaic form of hypochondria. Here it's used more to refer to his general depression, though. But it's an almost comical statement, what he says. Whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me, when they get control over me, to get the upper hand of something, when they get the upper hand of me, that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. You imagine this guy walking up to someone, because in 19th century, pretty much everyone wore hats, men and women alike. And you just imagine our author here walking around, grim about the mouth and just going up to someone and knocking their hat off. For no good reason, to start a fight, maybe?
Well, yeah, he obviously has some aggression inside of him, and so he has to control. It takes a lot of effort to control that so that he doesn't do these things like step into the street and get run over by a carriage or knock someone's hat off and get into a fight.
Right. Start just making mayhem, basically, and spreading chaos. I account it high time. An old way of saying I consider it, I decide that I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. High time means quickly, immediately. It is high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. Ball, an old-fashioned word for bullet. And he's basically saying here, this is my substitute for...
for suicide. So he needs to get out to sea, otherwise he might go crazy and might end up committing suicide.
Right, and he mentions this Cato person with a capital C there. Cato, a statesman in ancient Rome who opposed Julius Caesar and didn't want to live under Julius Caesar. So even though Caesar wasn't trying to kill him, but they were on opposing sides in a civil war, and Cato, like our author says, with a philosophical flourish, throws himself upon his sword. Cato believed that it was just, he had a personal philosophy that said, if you cannot live free or if you cannot live under someone that you admire and honor, then it's better not to live at all. And so Cato killed himself when he realized he could not defeat Caesar in that civil war.
Right, and I think Ishmael here chooses Cato as an example because he has this flair for the dramatic. Like he died a very dramatic death on his sword.
Definitely, and that is, again, another indication of how the rest of the story is going to go and why it's such a wonderful novel to read, because this is not just some sailor on a whaling boat. This is Herman Melville. I mean, again, it's not that it is strict autobiography, this is what happened and I'm just telling you. It is fiction. But because he did spend time on a whaling boat, he knows what he's talking about. And you can tell he is just full of that writer's impulse to tell you all about it in such detail.
Yes.
Ultimately, of course, because it reveals something about the human soul.
Exactly. And we encourage you to go read Moby Dick if you haven't. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, and just in parting, if you do go to read Moby Dick, I highly recommend reading what's called an annotated version of the book. Annotated means basically with notes, with little explanatory notes. Like we've done here with our excerpt. You could say that this is an annotated excerpt of Moby Dick. Online, you can find the entire book in an annotated version on powermobydick.com. POWERMOBYDICK. Powermobydick, no spaces, no caps, .com. You get the entire novel with all sorts of helpful annotations like we have here. And I highly recommend that even for native speakers, because there are many references that were more familiar in the 19th century than they are now.
Exactly.
Which the annotations will help you understand. But yeah, that's it for this month. Glad you could join us. Look forward to seeing you again for another book next month. In the meantime, I'm Peter.
I'm Linda. Saying goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.